The assumptions we make. The evening was unusually quiet as the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting a golden glow over the sprawling city. In a bustling shopping plaza, Dr. Lorraine Bennett strolled through the parking lot, balancing a paper bag filled with groceries. Lorraine, a celebrated humanitarian and founder of a nationwide nonprofit aiding underserved communities, had just returned from a long day mentoring students at a local school. Unbeknownst to her, Officer Dana Caldwell had been patrolling the area in her cruiser. Dana had a reputation for being stern and unyielding, qualities that earned her both respect and resentment among her peers. Her sharp gaze caught sight of Lorraine as she paused to arrange her bag in the trunk of her car. The sight gave Dana pause. "What's she doing here at this hour?" Dana muttered to herself, sipping her lukewarm coffee. Lorraine's formal attire, a fitted blazer and pressed slacks, seemed out of place among the casual shoppers. Coupled with Dana's heightened alertness from a recent string of thefts in the area, it was enough to spark her suspicion. Dana parked her cruiser and approached with purposeful strides. "Excuse me, Mom," she called out, her voice clipped but commanding. Startled, Lorraine turned to face her. Her warm brown eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, officer." "Is there a problem?" she asked, maintaining a calm yet cautious tone. Dana scanned her, taking note of the woman's composed demeanor, but unable to suppress her instinctive skepticism. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Lorraine blinked, caught off guard by the directness. "I'm loading groceries into my car," she replied evenly. "Is something wrong?" Dana's expression hardened. "Can I see some identification?" The request was sudden, and Lorraine felt a wave of unease. Still, she complied, reaching into her purse and handing over her driver's license. Dana scrutinized it, her eyes narrowing. "Dr. Lorraine Bennett," she read aloud, her tone almost mocking. "Doctor, huh? What kind of doctor?" Lorraine's patience began to thin, but she kept her composure. "I hold a PhD in social justice studies and run a nonprofit organization," she explained. Dana scoffed, unconvinced. "Right. And what's someone like you doing out here alone, after dark?" Lorraine's heart raced, but she maintained her calm facade. "I'm simply running errands, officer. Is that a crime?" Dana didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, invading Lorraine's personal space. "Something feels off about you," she said, her hand hovering near her utility belt. "Turn around. I'm taking you in for questioning." The words struck Lorraine like a physical blow. "Excuse me? On what grounds?" "Suspicious behavior," Dana replied curtly. Lorraine's jaw tightened, but she knew arguing would only escalate the situation. Reluctantly, she allowed Dana to handcuff her. A small crowd began to gather, their murmurs of confusion and concern blending with the hum of the cooling evening air. As Dana led Lorraine to the cruiser, Lorraine turned her face away from the onlookers, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She had dedicated her life to fighting injustice, yet here she was, subjected to it in one of its most blatant forms. The ride to the station was silent, save for the occasional crackle of the police radio. Lorraine stared out the window, her mind racing with a mix of anger, disbelief, and fear. She had spent years advocating for fairness and equality, only to find herself a victim of the very biases she fought against. When they arrived at the precinct, Dana escorted Lorraine inside. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh glare on the polished floors and sterile walls. Lorraine's presence immediately drew attention. Whispers rippled through the room as officers recognized her. "Is that Dr. Bennett?" one officer murmured, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What's she doing here?" another asked. Captain Marcus Bell, a towering man with a reputation for fairness and integrity, stepped out of his office to investigate the commotion. His sharp eyes took in the scene, from Lorraine's restrained hands to Dana's defiant posture. "Officer Caldwell, what's going on here?" Marcus asked, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. Dana squared her shoulders. "Suspicious activity in a parking lot, Captain. I apprehended her for questioning." Marcus frowned, his gaze shifting to Lorraine. "Dr. Bennett, is this true?" Lorraine met his eyes, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "Captain Bell, I was loading groceries into my car when Officer Caldwell approached me. I've done nothing wrong." Marcus's frown deepened as he turned back to Dana. "Did you verify her identity?" "Yes," Dana said, though her tone lacked confidence. "But she seemed out of place." Marcus's expression darkened. "Out of place? Officer Caldwell, do you realize who this is?" Dr. Lorraine Bennett is a respected leader in this community, a figure of change and inspiration. Dana's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Captain, I was doing my job." "Your job," Marcus said coldly, "is to protect and serve, not to make baseless assumptions. This precinct operates on principles of justice and fairness, and what you've done here violates those principles." The room fell silent as Marcus turned back to Lorraine. "Dr. Bennett, on behalf of this precinct, I sincerely apologize for this egregious mistake. I assure you, we will address this matter." Lorraine took a deep breath, her initial anger softening into a resolve to address the systemic issue she had just experienced. "Thank you, Captain Bell. I appreciate your apology, but this incident is about more than me. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else." Marcus nodded solemnly. "We will conduct a thorough investigation into Officer Caldwell's actions. You have my word." As the tension in the room hung heavy, Dana stood rooted in place, her mind racing with a mix of regret and defiance. The gravity of her actions was beginning to sink in, but the journey to understanding the depth of her error was far from over. Lorraine, ever composed, addressed the gathered officers. "Justice begins with accountability. We all have a responsibility to confront our biases and strive for fairness in every interaction. Let this be a moment of learning and growth, not just punishment." Her words resonated, leaving the room in thoughtful silence as Marcus escorted her out. For Lorraine, this was only the beginning of a larger conversation, one she was determined to lead, no matter how painful the journey. The weight of bias. Lorraine sat in the passenger seat of Captain Marcus Bell's car as he personally drove her home from the precinct. The atmosphere was heavy, leaden with unsaid words. Marcus occasionally glanced at her, his expression a mix of regret and respect. "I can't apologize enough, Dr. Bennett," Marcus said, his voice quiet but sincere. "What happened tonight is unacceptable." Lorraine turned to him, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. "Captain, this isn't just about me. It's about the system that allowed this to happen. What Officer Caldwell did wasn't just a personal failing. It's a symptom of something much larger." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "You're right. Bias like this undermines everything we stand for." When they arrived at her modest home, a warm, welcoming space nestled in a quiet neighborhood, Marcus hesitated before unlocking the doors. "If there's anything I can do to make this right, please let me know." Lorraine smiled faintly, her composure unwavering. "You've already started, Captain. Acknowledging the problem is the first step." As Lorraine stepped into her house, she was greeted by the soft meow of her cat, Moxie, who wove around her legs in welcome. She dropped her keys on the counter and sank into the plush armchair in her living room. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what had happened. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she reached for her phone and began drafting a statement. Lorraine knew she couldn't let this moment pass without addressing it publicly. Her platform wasn't just for highlighting victories. It was also for confronting hard truths. At the precinct, the fallout from the incident was just beginning. Dana sat alone in a small windowless room, her badge and weapon resting on the table before her. She stared at them, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger at being called out, shame at her actions, and a stubborn refusal to admit she'd been wrong all clashed within her. Captain Bell entered, his imposing presence filling the room. He sat across from her, his expression unreadable. "Donna," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I want you to explain to me, step by step, what led you to arrest Dr. Bennett." Dana crossed her arms defensively. She looked out of place. "Captain, the area's had a lot of thefts recently, and she was acting suspicious." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "What about her seems suspicious to you?" Dana hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "I don't know. She just did." "That's not good enough," Marcus said sharply. "You didn't see her commit a crime. She wasn't behaving aggressively. She complied with your requests. So tell me, Officer Caldwell, what made you decide she was a threat?" Dana opened her mouth to reply but found she couldn't. The truth loomed in her mind, ugly and undeniable. She had judged Lorraine based on her own unconscious biases, but admitting that out loud felt impossible. "I followed protocol," she said instead, her voice defensive. "No, you didn't," Marcus countered. "Protocol requires reasonable suspicion. What you had was an assumption, a dangerous one." Dana's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'm placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately. You'll undergo mandatory bias training and a thorough review of your past arrests. This isn't just about tonight, Dana. It's about ensuring that this precinct, and you, don't repeat these mistakes." Dana looked away, her stomach twisting with a mix of humiliation and resentment. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but deep down, she knew Marcus was right. She'd crossed a line, and now she had to face the consequences. The next morning, Lorraine's statement was published online. She recounted the events of the previous night with measured clarity, focusing not on condemning Dana personally, but on addressing the broader issue of systemic bias. "This experience has reminded me that no one is immune to prejudice, not even those of us who have dedicated our lives to fighting it. But moments like this are opportunities for growth. We must confront our biases, challenge the systems that perpetuate them, and work together to create a more just society." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from across the country, along with stories from others who had faced similar injustices. Lorraine read each one, her resolve strengthening with every word. Meanwhile, Dana's actions were under intense scrutiny. News of the incident spread rapidly, igniting a public conversation about the role of bias in policing. Protests erupted outside the precinct, demanding accountability and reform. At first, Dana avoided the coverage, retreating into her home and shutting out the world. But as the days passed, she found herself unable to ignore the mounting criticism. She began reading articles, watching interviews, and even scrolling through social media, where strangers dissected her actions with brutal honesty. It was painful, but it was also eye-opening. For the first time, Dana began to see herself through the eyes of others, not as a dedicated officer, but as a symbol of a broken system. The realization was both humbling and devastating. On the other side of the city, Lorraine was meeting with her team to discuss the next steps. They decided to organize a community forum, inviting local leaders, activists, and law enforcement officers to discuss bias and its impact. Lorraine reached out to Captain Bell, who readily agreed to participate. "I think it's a fantastic idea," Marcus said during their call. "We need more dialogue, more understanding. And honestly, I think Officer Caldwell should be there too." Lorraine hesitated. "Do you think she'll come?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but I'll make sure she knows she's welcome." Dana received the invitation a few days later. At first, she considered ignoring it, unwilling to face the public backlash. But as she sat at her kitchen table, the invitation in her hands, she thought about everything she'd read and heard in the past week. She thought about Lorraine's calm dignity, even in the face of such blatant injustice, and she thought about her own role in perpetuating that injustice. For the first time, Dana felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before: genuine remorse. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed Marcus's number. "I'll be there," she said simply. And so, The stage was set for a confrontation, not of anger, but of understanding. It would be the first step on a long and difficult journey, but both Lorraine and Dana were ready to take it. The forum begins. The community center buzzed with anticipation as people filled the large hall for the scheduled forum. Lorraine Bennett stood at the front, greeting attendees with her characteristic warmth. A stage had been set up with a panel of speakers, including activists, legal experts, and community leaders. Captain Marcus Bell stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived, while officers from the precinct formed a subdued presence in the back. Dana Caldwell hesitated just outside the hall. The muffled sounds of voices and occasional bursts of applause filtered through the closed doors. Clutching her invitation, Dana felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She wasn't sure what she feared more, facing the community she had wronged or confronting the truths about herself that the forum might reveal. "You're here," a voice said from behind her. Dana turned to see Marcus standing there, his expression neutral but supportive. "Yeah," Dana replied, her voice hesitant. "I wasn't sure if I should come." "I'm glad you did," Marcus said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This isn't about punishment, Dana. It's about learning and moving forward." Dana nodded, taking a deep breath. Together, they stepped inside. A call for unity. Lorraine took the stage as the forum began. She stood at the podium, her presence commanding yet approachable. A hush fell over the crowd as she began to speak. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "Thank you all for being here. Tonight isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about confronting uncomfortable truths and working together to create a better future." She paused, scanning the room. Her eyes briefly met Dana's, and the officer felt a pang of guilt mixed with respect. Lorraine continued, "My story is not unique. For many, the experience I had is a daily reality. But we are here tonight to ensure that such experiences become a thing of the past. To do that, we need honest conversations, accountability, and most importantly, action." The audience erupted in applause, the energy in the room shifting from tense to hopeful. Personal stories. The first half of the forum featured testimonies from community members who shared their own experiences with bias and injustice. A young man spoke about being profiled while walking home from work. A mother recounted her fear when her teenage son was stopped by police for no apparent reason. Each story added a layer of urgency to the conversation. Dana listened intently, each account hitting closer to home. She realized how often she had dismissed such stories in the past, viewing them as exaggerated or isolated incidents. Hearing them now, in person, she couldn't ignore their common thread: the pain caused by assumptions like hers. When it was Lorraine's turn to speak, the room fell silent once again. "Bias doesn't always announce itself," Lorraine said. "It can be quiet, insidious, and often unrecognized by those who hold it. But its impact is loud, and its consequences are far-reaching." She paused, her gaze steady. "We all have biases. The question is, what do we do when we recognize them? Do we confront them, or do we let them dictate our actions?" Dana speaks. As the second half of the forum began, Marcus approached Dana, who had been sitting in the back. "I think it's time," he said softly. Dana hesitated, her palms sweating, but she knew this moment was inevitable. With a nod, she stood and followed Marcus to the stage. Lorraine watched her approach, her expression unreadable. Dana stepped up to the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped its edges. "My name is Officer Dana Caldwell," she began, her voice shaking, "and I'm the one who arrested Dr. Bennett." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dana took a deep breath and continued. "When I stopped her that night, I thought I was doing my job. I thought I was protecting the community. But the truth is, I was wrong. I made assumptions about her that had no basis in fact. And those assumptions weren't just wrong, they were harmful." She paused, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. To Dr. Bennett, to this community, and to everyone who has ever been judged unfairly. I'm sorry." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, Lorraine stood and approached the podium. "Officer Caldwell," she said, her tone measured, "acknowledging your mistakes is an important first step. But words alone are not enough. Are you willing to take action to ensure this doesn't happen again?" Dana nodded, her voice firmer now. "Yes, I want to learn. I want to do better. And I want to be part of the solution." Lorraine extended her hand. "Then let's start there." The two women shook hands, and the audience erupted into applause. The moment, captured by countless phones and cameras, became a symbol of reconciliation and the possibility of change. Building bridges. The forum ended with a series of actionable commitments. Lorraine announced plans to establish a task force dedicated to addressing bias in law enforcement. Captain Bell pledged the precinct's full support, including mandatory training for all officers and a review of existing protocols. Dana volunteered to be one of the first officers to undergo the training. "It's not enough to fix the system," she said during the closing remarks. "We have to fix ourselves, too." The audience left the forum with a sense of hope and determination. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but the evening had laid a strong foundation for progress. A step forward. That night, as Lorraine reflected on the day's events, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. The forum had been a success, but she knew the real work was just beginning. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but it would happen /U2014 one conversation, one action, one step at a time. For Dana, the journey was just beginning. She had taken the first step toward understanding and growth, and she was determined to see it through. She knew she couldn't undo the past, but she could work to build a better future /U2014, not just for herself, but for the community she had sworn to serve. The weight of change. The days following the forum marked a turning point for Dana Caldwell. The emotional weight of the event lingered, but so did a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, Dana was questioning not just her actions but her beliefs and the systems she had been part of for so long. It wasn't easy. She felt exposed, as if the walls she had built around herself were slowly crumbling, leaving her vulnerable but also open to growth. Dana's suspension remained in place, and with it came an unfamiliar stillness in her life. The absence of her usual routine gave her time to reflect, to read, and to reach out. She had been provided a list of resources from the precinct's mandatory bias training program, including articles, books, and documentaries about systemic racism and implicit bias. Dana decided to dive into them, not because she was forced to, but because she felt she owed it to herself and to the community she served. One book in particular struck a chord with her, Blind Spot: Hidden Biases of Good People. As Dana turned each page, she felt an uncomfortable mix of recognition and shame. The words articulated the very assumptions she had acted on that night in the parking lot. The book didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped her understand how her biases had been shaped and reinforced over time. Lorraine's next steps. While Dana grappled with her internal transformation, Lorraine Bennett's life was anything but quiet. The forum had sparked widespread interest, and Lorraine found herself inundated with invitations to speak at schools, churches, and civic organizations. The story of her arrest had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of the fight against bias and injustice. Yet, Lorraine knew that symbols alone wouldn't create change. She worked tirelessly to formalize the task force she had announced during the forum. The group, which she named Bridges to Justice, brought together activists, law enforcement officials, educators, and community members. Their mission was clear: to identify and address the root causes of bias in policing and beyond. One of Lorraine's first actions was to establish a mentorship program for police officers. The idea was simple yet powerful. Officers would be paired with community members from diverse backgrounds to foster understanding and build trust. Lorraine believed that proximity, genuine human connection, was one of the most effective ways to dismantle prejudice. Dana was among the first officers to sign up. The mentorship pairing. Dana's mentor was a retired teacher named Mr. Isaiah Green. At 72, Isaiah was a gentle yet firm presence, with a warm smile that belied his sharp wit. He had lived in the city his entire life, and had witnessed both its progress and its setbacks. Their first meeting was awkward. Dana arrived at Isaiah's modest home, clutching a notebook filled with questions she had prepared in an effort to seem engaged. Isaiah greeted her with a firm handshake and ushered her into the living room, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. "So, Officer Caldwell," Isaiah began, settling into his armchair, "tell me why you're here." Dana hesitated. I want to understand," she said finally. "I want to learn about the community, about the experiences I've overlooked." Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. "Good, but let me ask you something. Are you here to learn about others, or are you here to learn about yourself?" The question caught Dana off guard. She hadn't considered the distinction. "I guessed both," she admitted. Isaiah smiled. "Then we're off to a good start." Over the weeks that followed, Dana and Isaiah met regularly. Their conversations ranged from Isaiah's experiences during the civil rights movement to Dana's struggles with reconciling her role as a police officer with her desire for justice. Isaiah didn't shy away from challenging her, but he also offered guidance and encouragement. One day, as they walked through a park in the neighborhood Isaiah had lived in for decades, he pointed to a row of newly built townhouses. "You see those?" he asked. Dana nodded. "Yeah. They look nice. They used to be a community center," Isaiah said. "A place where kids could go after school, where families could gather. It got torn down to make room for those townhouses. Progress, they called it." Dana frowned. "I didn't know that." Isaiah glanced at her. "That's the thing, Dana. You can't serve a community you don't know. And you can't know it if you don't listen." The words stayed with Dana long after their meeting ended. Lorraine and Dana crossed paths again. Months after the forum, Lorraine and Dana met again, not in an official setting, but at a local school where Lorraine was speaking to students about her work with Bridges to Justice. Dana had been invited by Isaiah, who thought it would be a good opportunity for her to see Lorraine in a different light. As Lorraine addressed the room full of eager young faces, Dana watched from the back, feeling a mix of admiration and regret. Lorraine's passion was palpable, her words inspiring. She spoke not as a victim, but as a leader determined to create a better future. After the event, Lorraine spotted Dana and approached her. "Officer Caldwell," she said, her tone neutral but not unkind. "Dr. Bennett," Dana replied, standing a bit straighter. "You were amazing up there." "Thank you," Lorraine said. "And how are you? How's the mentorship program going?" Dana hesitated, then smiled. "It's eye-opening. Isaiah's been teaching me a lot." "I'm glad to hear that," Lorraine said. She studied Dana for a moment before adding, "You know, the real work is just beginning. For both of us." Dana nodded. "I know, but I'm ready." Lorraine extended her hand, and Dana shook it. It wasn't a moment of resolution. There was still much to be done, but it was a moment of understanding. And for now, that was enough. The ripple effect. The work of transformation rippled outward, its impact reaching far beyond the walls of the community center where Lorraine and Dana first faced each other. The mentorship program Lorraine had championed, paired with the task force's initiatives, began to influence not just individuals, but the broader systems they sought to change. For Dana Caldwell, the lessons she was learning from Isaiah Green and others in the community were both humbling and transformative. She realized that the job she once viewed as protecting people from threats was far more complex than she had imagined. It wasn't just about enforcing laws. It was about serving and understanding people, something she had never fully grasped before. The precinct's turning point. At the precinct, Captain Marcus Bell pushed for sweeping reforms. Officers were now required to attend monthly workshops on cultural competence and implicit bias, facilitated by experts in the field. These sessions weren't just lectures. They included role-playing scenarios, open discussions, and, most importantly, the voices of community members who had faced injustice. Dana found herself dreading the first workshop. The prospect of sitting in a room with her peers, many of whom viewed the reforms as unnecessary or even punitive, felt daunting. But as the session unfolded, she realized that others were grappling with similar feelings of guilt, defensiveness, and confusion. One moment stood out. During a group exercise, an older officer named Frank, who had been with the force for over 30 years, admitted, "I've always thought of myself as fair, but now I'm questioning how many times I might have acted on assumptions without even realizing it." His vulnerability opened the door for others to share their own doubts and experiences. Dana, emboldened by Frank's honesty, shared her story of the night she arrested Lorraine. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, her voice trembling. "But I wasn't. I wasn't protecting anyone. I was perpetuating harm." The room was silent as her words sank in. For many officers, it was a wake-up call. They began to see bias not as an accusation, but as a reality they all needed to confront. Lorraine's expanding reach. Meanwhile, Lorraine's work with Bridges to Justice was gaining national attention. Media outlets covered the mentorship program, highlighting its unique approach to bridging the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. Donations poured in, allowing the organization to expand its efforts. Lorraine traveled across the country, meeting with community leaders, activists, and police chiefs. She spoke at conferences, universities, and even before Congress, advocating for policy changes to address systemic bias. Her message was clear. Real change required more than words. It demanded action at every level of society. But amidst her growing influence, Lorraine never lost sight of her local community. She continued to host forums, mentor young leaders, and build relationships with those who felt unseen and unheard. For Lorraine, the work was deeply personal. Every success, no matter how small, reminded her of the night she was arrested, and the determination it had sparked in her to make sure others didn't face the same injustice. A shared journey. One afternoon, months after their initial confrontation, Dana reached out to Lorraine. She asked if they could meet, not as adversaries or even as collaborators, but simply as two people trying to navigate a complicated world. They met at a small coffee shop near Lorraine's office. The air was thick with unspoken tension as they sat across from each other, but it quickly dissipated as Dana spoke. "I'd want to thank you," Dana said, her voice steady. "Not just for your patience, but for the example you've set. You didn't have to do any of this. Forgive me, work with me, or even acknowledge me. But you did, and it's changed me." Lorraine smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't just about the other person, Dana. It's about letting go of anger so we can move forward. And if I want the world to change, I can't afford to let bitterness hold me back." They talked for hours, sharing stories of their journeys since the forum. Dana spoke about her growing bond with Isaiah and how it had reshaped her understanding of community. Lorraine shared the challenges and triumphs of leading a national movement while staying connected to her roots. By the time they left the coffee shop, both women felt a sense of closure, not because the work was finished, but because they had found common ground from which to continue. Measuring progress. The changes initiated by Bridges to Justice and the precinct reforms began to bear fruit. Reports of community tensions decreased, and trust in law enforcement slowly began to rebuild. Officers who participated in the mentorship program often described it as a turning point in their careers, citing newfound empathy and understanding. Dana, now reinstated, became one of the program's most vocal advocates. She worked closely with Lorraine and Isaiah to refine the curriculum, ensuring it addressed the nuances of policing in diverse communities. Her willingness to share her story, both within the precinct and at public events, earned her respect from colleagues and civilians alike. Lorraine, meanwhile, continued to push for systemic changes at the state and federal levels. Her efforts led to the passage of legislation mandating bias training for all law enforcement officers in the state, along with funding for community-led oversight boards. The ripple becomes a wave. What started as a single moment of injustice had grown into a movement that touched lives far beyond the city where it began. Lorraine and Dana's partnership became a symbol of what was possible when accountability met grace, and when individuals chose to confront their biases rather than deny them. But neither of them saw their journey as complete. For Lorraine, every new law, every successful program, was a step forward, but not the finish line. For Dana, every interaction with the community was an opportunity to rebuild trust, one person at a time. As they stood together at a rally celebrating the one-year anniversary of the Bridges to Justice initiative, Lorraine turned to Dana and said, "This is what change looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but worth it." Dana nodded, her heart full of both pride and humility. And it's just the beginning. A new foundation. 1 year after the night of Lorraine Bennett's arrest, the city held its first annual Day of Unity, a celebration inspired by the progress made through Bridges to Justice and the collaborative reforms initiated between the community and law enforcement. A large crowd gathered in the city's main square, where a stage had been erected for speeches, performances, and community discussions. Lorraine stood at the center of it all, reflecting on how much had changed and how much work was still ahead. Her nonprofit had grown exponentially, but so had her responsibilities. She now split her time between grassroots efforts and advocating for systemic reform at the national level. Despite the challenges, Lorraine remained rooted in her commitment to justice, her resolve strengthened by the visible impact of her work. Dana Caldwell, now a leading voice in her precinct for accountability and community engagement, was one of the keynote speakers at the event. Her transformation had not come without challenges. Some colleagues still viewed her as a cautionary tale, while others saw her as a traitor for publicly acknowledging the flaws within the system. Yet Dana's resilience and willingness to learn had won over many, both within the department and in the community. The event begins. The Day of Unity began with a series of cultural performances, highlighting the city's diversity. Local artists, musicians, and storytellers shared their talents, creating an atmosphere of celebration and reflection. Vendors lined the streets, offering food from various cultures, while children played games and painted murals under the supervision of community volunteers. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the crowd gathered around the stage for the speeches. Captain Marcus Bell, the first to speak, set the tone for the event. "Today is not about pretending that we fixed everything," Marcus said, his voice steady but impassioned. "It's about recognizing the steps we've taken and recommitting ourselves to the journey ahead. Change is a marathon, not a sprint, and we're in it for the long haul." The crowd erupted in applause, and Lorraine smiled as she took her place behind the podium. She began by thanking the community for their resilience and dedication. "This day is not about me or any one person," she said. "It's about us, about what we can achieve when we choose understanding over assumptions, courage over complacency, and hope over fear." Lorraine's speech recounted the difficult journey of the past year, weaving in stories of progress and resilience. She spoke about the mentorship program, the forums, and the officers who had embraced the opportunity to grow. As she spoke, her eyes found Dana in the crowd, and she smiled. "We've learned that change isn't easy," Lorraine said. "It's uncomfortable. It's messy. But it's also necessary. And together, we've proven that it's possible." Dana's turn. When Dana approached the podium, she was met with a mixture of applause and curiosity. She adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath, scanning the sea of faces before her. "A year ago, I stood at a very different crossroads," she began. "I was an officer who thought I was doing my job well. But in reality, I was blind to my own biases. That blindness led me to make a mistake that hurt someone who deserved my respect, not my suspicion." Dana paused, her voice trembling slightly as she continued. "What I've learned since then is that acknowledgement is just the beginning. Real change requires action. It requires humility. It requires listening." She went on to describe her journey with Isaiah Green, the mentorship program, and the conversations that had challenged her to see the world through a broader lens. "I've realized that being a good officer isn't just about enforcing the law," Dana said. "It's about building trust, about serving with compassion, and about holding myself accountable, not just to my badge, but to the people I've sworn to protect." The crowd responded with applause, and Dana felt a swell of emotion. For the first time, she believed she was contributing to the change she once resisted. Stories of transformation. Throughout the day, members of the community shared their own stories of how bridges to justice had impacted their lives. A teenager spoke about how the mentorship program helped him see law enforcement in a new light, inspiring him to consider a career in community advocacy. An officer shared how the bias training workshops had changed the way he approached his work, leading to more positive interactions with the people he served. Lorraine and Dana listened intently, each story affirming the importance of the work they had undertaken. The common thread in all these stories was a renewed sense of connection between individuals, between groups, and between the community and its protectors. A partnership solidified. As the event wound down, Lorraine and Dana found themselves standing together near a newly unveiled mural, a vibrant depiction of unity and resilience created by local artists. The mural featured images of community members, law enforcement, and activists working side by side, with the words "Justice through Understanding" emblazoned across the top. "It's beautiful," Dana said, her voice filled with awe. "It is," Lorraine agreed. She turned to Dana, her expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way, Dana. I hope you're proud of that." Dana nodded. "I am. But I also know there's more to do." "There always is," Lorraine said with a smile. "But the fact that you're willing to keep doing the work, that's what matters." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared journey hanging between them. It wasn't a moment of finality. There was still too much to be done for that. But it was a moment of recognition, of mutual respect. Looking ahead, as the sun set on the day of unity, the city felt different. Not perfect, not free of its challenges, but imbued with a renewed sense of purpose. The partnerships forged over the past year had laid a foundation for ongoing progress, and the community was committed to building on that foundation together. For Lorraine, the day was a reminder of why she had chosen this path. For Dana, it was proof that redemption was possible, not just for individuals, but for systems. As they parted ways that evening, Lorraine offered Dana a final piece of advice. Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments. Moments like this. Don't underestimate the power of those moments. Dana nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. "I won't." And with that, they stepped into their respective futures, bound by a shared commitment to justice, understanding, and the belief that even the smallest actions could spark the greatest transformations. Closing the circle. As the crowd dispersed and the evening grew quieter, Lorraine and Dana lingered near the mural. They had been at the center of the city's transformation, their lives intertwined by an event that could have divided them, but instead brought about a wave of change. "You know," Dana said, breaking the silence, "when I first put on this uniform, I thought I understood what justice meant. But I didn't. Not really." Lorraine tilted her head, listening. "What does it mean to you now?" Dana's gaze was steady. "It means seeing people, not just the roles they play or the assumptions we make about them, but really seeing them. It means accountability, not just for others, but for myself. And it means being willing to learn, even when it's uncomfortable." Lorraine smiled. "That's a good start." Dana exhaled, her breath visible in the cool evening air. "Thank you for giving me a chance to be better. You didn't have to, but you did." Lorraine's expression softened. "We're all learning, Dana. The important thing is what we do with the lessons. You've proven you're willing to grow, and that's all anyone can ask." A community reborn. Over the months that followed, the city continued to evolve. The mentorship program expanded, involving more officers and community members, while the precinct's reforms became a model for neighboring cities. Schools integrated lessons about bias and empathy into their curricula, ensuring that the next generation would be more equipped to address the challenges of their time. Lorraine and Dana's partnership became a symbol of what was possible when accountability met understanding. They spoke together at events, sharing their story not as a tale of redemption for one and resilience for the other, but as a testament to the power of collaboration. For Dana, the transformation was deeply personal. She found herself approaching her work with a new sense of purpose. Every interaction became an opportunity to build trust, to show that the badge she wore was a symbol of service, not authority. The respect she earned wasn't immediate or universal, but it was real, and it was enough. For Lorraine, the experience reaffirmed her belief in the power of grace and persistence. Her advocacy work continued to grow, but she always made time for the community that had shaped her. She saw herself not as a savior, but as a bridge, a connector of people and ideas, dedicated to creating a world where justice was more than just an ideal. A final moment. 1 year later, on the second day of Unity, the city unveiled a new addition to the mural. The vibrant depiction of the community now included 2 figures standing side by side, one in a blazer representing advocacy and leadership, and the other in a uniform, symbolizing service and accountability. Below them, the words "justice through understanding" had been joined by a new phrase, "unity through action." As Lorraine and Dana stood before the mural once more, a group of children approached, their curious eyes wide. "Are those supposed to be you?" one boy asked, pointing at the figures. Lorraine chuckled. "Maybe. But it's not about us. It's about what we've built together." The boy nodded thoughtfully, then looked up at Dana. "Does this mean you're a good cop now?" Dana knelt to meet his gaze. "It means I'm trying to be. And it means I'll keep trying, every day." The boy smiled, satisfied with her answer, and ran off to join his friends. Lorraine watched him go, her heart full. "You know," she said, turning to Dana, "moments like that remind me why we do this." Dana nodded, her expression reflective. "Yeah, it's worth it." And as the sun set on the city, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, Lorraine and Dana stood side by side, a testament to the power of accountability, resilience, and the unyielding belief that change, no matter how slow or difficult, was always worth fighting for.